On the first interview of Know Your Bass Player, I'm interviewing Andrew Barter, the creator of Tech 21 and the Sans app. We talk about the creative process of Geddy Lee's GED 2112, the release of the YYZ, and then put questions to Andrew about himself and Tech 21. Andrew Barter, nice to meet you, sir.
Hello.
For those that aren't familiar with you and Tech 21, could you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay. I'm Andrew Barta. I'm the president of Tech 21. And we were talking before we started this video that I was forced into this position to own this company. And now I'm really happy about it. But at the time, when I had the original idea for the Sans amp, a direct recording device for guitar and bass, I was very unhappy that I couldn't find a suitable company who would make this idea a reality. And I approached companies like Gibson and Digitech DoD and all the big players. And everybody refused that. They didn't see the possibility. So I was forced to build the first pieces myself in my kitchen. And I took it down to Sam Ash on 48th Street in Manhattan. And I asked them to sell it. And they refused also. But when I told them that they don't have to pay for it until it's actually sold, they said, I will give a try. And next day they sold one to Def Leppard, after that Kiss. And then that's how it started, and then it became a company.
I also hear a congratulations is in order, as it's the 30th anniversary of Tech 21. Are you doing anything to celebrate? Any anniversary pedals?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we do, but it's still under wraps, so I cannot disclose it. But in a couple weeks, month, probably 30 days, we're going to introduce it, and it's a really cool thing. So we are very excited about it, and it's going back to our roots. So, it all ties everything beautiful together.
Fantastic. Oh, that's really good. I can't wait to see that.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, Phil Collen of Def Leppard was one of your first artist encounters. Was there anyone else in the early days that you met that you were taken aback by?
Well, actually, the very first artist was Mick Jones from Foreigner, because he didn't buy it from Sam Ash. He bought it directly from me, because at the time I was doing maintenance and modifications on his Marshall, because I had a repair shop on 30th Street. And I was on weekly contact with his tech. And when I had the first prototype, I asked his tech if he would show it to Mick. Mm-hmm. And then actually, I think I ended up showing it myself, and then he didn't want to give it back to me. He was so fond of it. So that's when I thought that I have something, something good. So he was my first major artist, who's incidentally is from England. Mm-hmm. And, he was a real gentleman about it. He was willing to give us quotes and helping us along the way with no compensation whatsoever. And till this day, believe it or not, we work with artists mostly on their goodwill. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we give equipment, like Mick got, a couple of Sans amps, and we were talking about Geddy Lee, the whole relationship actually started that he already used our product, yes. Unbeknown to us. And then one day he lifted up the phone and called us. I talked to my artist relations guy, Tom Rogers. And, they got into a conversation and, about equipment and all that. And that's how our relationship started. But it was not like that. We called him and say, like, pretty please do this. I'm going to give you, a lot of money if you do this. And it's like what you hear about, let's say, Michael Jackson and Pepsi. He got like $1 million to do a Pepsi commercial. And we don't even know if he drinks Pepsi or used to drink Pepsi. But for money, people are willing to do anything. So I'm really proud that all of our artists are really believing in the product, and that's why they work with us, not because we are compensate them in some way. As a matter of fact, one of the other major bass player that we worked with was John Entwistle. He came to me in Frankfurt at the trade show, and he expressed his desire to have something that he could have his sound, which is thunderous and real loud at the lower level. And he heard about our PSA, the programmable Sans amp. Yeah. And unfortunately, his guitar player, Pete Townsend, was going deaf. So, he was told that, he has to turn it down. He can't just keep, running the volume he used to. So he was looking for a solution and he found it in our product. And that was one of those artists also that we worked on very early. And he bought it, and many other these major guys. It made me so proud that they actually put the money out there, because that shows you that there is a real respect from the artist to the company.
And it serves a purpose for them, and they believe in it, like you said.
Exactly. And so we had many other artists. Some artists we just heard that they use it, like Michael Anthony from Van Halen. He used our original classic on bass, and I never met him, never talked to him about it. But many times we have like mutual friends or technicians who tell us these stories. But we had other artists who called, for example, Les Paul called me directly. One day the phone rings and it's Les Paul on line 3. And I was, you joking? And I pick it up and it's really Les Paul. And then we had a beautiful 10-year relationship after that. We made his amp, he used our amp. We made some DIs for him, and it just worked really beautifully. And he's really the pioneer of music electronics.
Of course.
So we used to pick each other brain, about different processes. And he invited me over to his house, which is actually, incidentally, not that far from here, about half hour.
Really?
Yeah. And he had a recording studio there, and the first 8-track ever made in the world, which is in the Smithsonian right now. Yeah, but at that time it was in his kitchen. So I actually have a picture with him in front of the 8-track. Yeah.
A piece of musical history right there.
Exactly.
And what amplifier did he use? What did he like about it
Okay,
so much?
originally he used a Fender amp, and they constantly had problems because it was a tube amp. And as you know, when you move a tube amp, the sockets gets loose, there are contact issues. And Les was a very, very picky guy. And his son was his technician. And they constantly argued about is this good enough? There are problems. And the Fender can sound really good one day, and the next day it doesn't. There's more humidity in the air, something happened. So they wanted to find a solution that they don't have this constant change in the performance of the amp. So they started to looking into solid state. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we at the time were like one of the pioneers of making a solid state amp that had the tube sound, the trademark 60. And his bass player, Paul Nowinski, who incidentally played with many famous people, he's a studio musician. He also plays stand-up bass and regular electric bass. He was using RDI. So he told Les to okay, I need to know these guys. At that time, we were in Manhattan. So I know these guys in New York City who make really good equipment, and they make amplifiers too. You should give it a try. So that's how Les got in touch with us, and we, of course, gladly complied with his request to try out our amplifier, and he loved it, and it's worked out. So the last 10 years of his life, he was using our amp.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I don't think many people knew that.
Yeah, I know, and we are really proud of it. And we even have a photograph of his 90th birthday. He gave a concert at Carnegie Hall, and there's the amp right behind him. So that was like a really special event, and that photograph ended up in the New York Times. And I actually made friends with the photographer, and we asked her to sell us some of the photos at a reasonable cost. So we have those photographs. So now that's musical history. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. You mentioned earlier about Geddy Lee, and you touched on how he came to you. Can you tell us the process of how the unit came to be? And you've already mentioned that Geddy approached you. How did it go from there?
Well, at the time, Tom Rogers, our artist relation guy, he recommended Geddy to try the RBI because Geddy was looking for more bass-oriented product, and at the time he was using the PSA, which is actually covers bass and guitar. It's a PSA stands for Programmable Sans Amp, and it's programmable so you can set up bass sounds and also guitar sounds. And but it doesn't have facilities like the RBI had, which is the mix facility to get the direct sound mixed together with the amp sound, which gives you like a more powerful bass sound, as you know. It's more layered. So Time recommended the RBI, and then later on, when we had the RPM, which is a parametric EQ combined with the SansAmp, then Getty started to use that. And they used it for, I guess it's about 18 years now, something like that. I have to look at the numbers, but it was the early 2000s that he started to use our product, and he basically got rid of all amps, so he would just went direct, and as you know, famously using like washing machines behind his back or a grill with chickens on it. And the chickens got cooked by the end of the show, so you had something to eat. Getty has a very interesting sense of humor. I would compare it to actually a little bit to like a British sense of humor, like really a little bit offbeat. He likes to do those things, wacky. Yeah. And so with this direct sound, like he was able to put whatever they wanted behind him, as a stage setup. And I think that makes him also very unique, But the main reason he was doing this because they were in 100% control of the sound. From venue to venue, they were able to get the sound exactly the same. There were no problems with, the room being different or the amplifier not working correctly. And I think that was the main reason. And the other reason I talked to him personally about this is that he has to do a lot of things. He has to sing. He has to play keyboards. He has to play bass pedal and remember the lyrics same time. So he doesn't have time to try to adjust something on the amplifier and worry about how the sound is. So he has in-ear monitors. And he has a tech who sets everything up for him so he can concentrate solely on the performance and not the technical aspects of playing in a live show. And that's why this was essential for him to have a direct sound that is reliable, but it also gives you the dynamics of an amplifier. Because as you know, when you plug in a bass directly to a mixer, it's a kind of a dead sound. I always compare this. I have philosophies on designing, and one of my philosophies is that, like, for example, a stand-up bass took hundreds of years to develop, okay? And believe it or not, that big body of the stand-up bass, that's an equalizer, okay? You can look at it as an equalizer. With a tweeter, the F-holes are actually a tweeters. So what you have is really a mechanical box that amplifies your sound, but not flatly. People are in misbelief that a bass has to be amplified flat. You need a perfectly flat sound, and that's when you have a bass, a good bass sound. And that's not true. Because if you look at the stand-up bass, it has a resonant frequency at the low end. And then, as I said, the F-holes also amplifies the high end. So you have actually a scoop sound. And why do you have a scoop sound? Because you have to fit the other instruments between, right? For example, a human vocal, that's a mid-range instrument. A guitar is a mid-range instrument. So the bass has to leave space for these other instruments. So if you look at any guy who is like a famous guy mixing bands, they understand this principle. So they mix the band to leave these spaces for the other instruments so they don't cover the other one. For example, one of the most difficult one is the snare drum and the guitar because they, in a similar frequency range, they can wash, and the cymbals too. There's like basically white noise. They can wash each other out. So you need to equalize them in a way, and many times it's actually not an EQ. It's just the positioning of the microphones or, like how you record something, but you find those spaces. So now you can have, it's like the color of the rainbow. All the instruments you find in their respective place. And obviously, believe it or not, actually the bass is not on the bottom. The kick drum is on the bottom.
Yeah, that's the foundation of all of the band is the kick drum. Yeah.
Exactly, because the kick drum has a pitch that is barely recognizable as a frequency is more recognizable as a thump, like a very low end. You feel it with your stomach. You're not hearing it, you're feeling it, right?
Yeah.
But the bass is actually has a pitch recognizable frequency, okay? And then you have all the other instruments. But this is all a philosophy. So when I created the Sans amp, I kept this philosophy in hand of designing, and I looked at cabinets because bass cabinets do exactly what a stand-up bass body does. They equalize naturally. And interestingly enough, they also have a huge roll-off, like under like sometimes 30, sometimes 40 hertz, and that leaves room for the kick drum, okay? Because I heard sometimes mixes that people mix all the very low frequencies of the bass, and then it just interacts with the kick drum in a bad way, not in a good way. So you have to like figure that out correctly. And actually, when we developed a pedal with Doug Pinnick, that was one of the big things because he uses the bass detuned to C sharp. Okay, so he has very low frequencies.
Very low.
But he told us that his soundman actually neuters his sound, meaning of cuts some of that low end off to leave room for the kick drum. Okay? So many times what you hear is actually the first harmonic of that low string. People don't realize this, that most bass cabinets don't actually, they're not able to transmit like a low B. What you hear is the first harmonic, okay? But it's give you that interesting feeling of that very low note, but that's not what you're actually hearing.
No, that's not the full representation.
Yeah, exactly. So, but getting back to that, so the cabinet, an integral part of a good bass sound, okay? It's actually part of your instrument. People think that a bass is a bass and that's your instrument. No. The amp,
just the beginning.
Exactly. The amp is the other part of your instrument. So without the amp, you don't have a bass sound. Yes, you hear notes, but it's not the bass sound you hear on a Beatle record or on a Who record. That's all the amp that you hear. And it's so funny that people for years said that bass should be clean, pristine clean. But you listen to a Beatles recording, especially if you can get ISO tracks, you recognize that it's distorted because they have strength, but that's what gives you that cool sound. And that's what I always wanted to put into our product, and that's why the Sans amp became what it is, because you always had that control of being able to go to just the limit when it starts to get like overdriven, and it gives you extra harmonics, but it also gives you that dynamic feeling of an amp being driven. And that's the secret to the Sans amp, basically.
I know Geddy wanted his, I guess, the sound of a speaker cabinet, so he came to you. Did he come to you with a characteristic of another sound, or was there anything else that was part of his brief?
No, it's actually worked backwards because we designed already the RBI and the RPM, and we was 100% happy with that. So the only thing we did with the new product that his name on it is he has a tech. His name is John McIntosh, but everybody calls him Scully. And he is the one who sets up Geddy's sound. And they had a huge rack. I saw them many times, backstage before shows, and we were talking about equipment and everything. And Scully was expressing that, he had this idea to compress all this equipment down to like a single rack space, because everything is available, especially with modern technology. So when we started to design the 2112, basically we started out with an existing product, which was at the time the RPM, the parametric EQ. But Scully was very clear about that. They run 3, sometimes 4 channels for Geddy. So one was the RPM. The other one was like a clean DI sound, but had a slight EQ curve to it. I usually don't like to mention other companies' name, but it was not our company. So it's had like a built-in actual speaker simulation, and it could slightly be, saturated. So they had that sound. That was the second one. Then sometime they ran like an orange amp, and they mic'd it up if they felt like, they ran that as like a little extra hair on the top of the sound. And there was, I think they even ran like, I think an Avalon DI, which later on they just they didn't use anymore. So basically, they had several things, and he just wanted to simplify this. So that was the whole idea, to at least have two channels with two XLRs, and also an AB switch. So when he switches, he has a wireless that's hooked up to two bases, and it's two channel. So these two wireless can go into this box and also create two other outputs. There are like a combination of the RPM and this clean DI. So we created that product, but the heart of it was still the RPM. But it became so popular, this product, the Getty 2112, that now we don't even make the RPM. You know, we just tell people that get Getty's preamp. But we were lucky enough that our original product already had the sound that Getty was looking for. Yeah, it is. And he used it for many years, so he was very used to it. And you know, even in his home studio, which I was fortunate enough to visit, you know, that's how the creative process is. They have a nice couch, and Alex comes in and sits across from Getty, and they just play with ideas, and Getty uses our product to go direct. And, you know, that's his setup. So he keeps it simple. See, Getty kind of a person, he's an artist. He really wants to concentrate on his craft, which is writing the songs and the bass lines and the singing. And he wants to take as little time as possible with the technical aspects of it. So that's why he has a full-time tech, Scully, who takes care of all of that. As long as Getty's happy, then everything is good. And he's happy. So, yeah, that's how this whole thing came by. And, you know, the other thing what Getty really liked is, as you know, he's a huge collection of basses. And
yes, I've seen pictures.
And he released a new book on that. And all these basses, they sound different through our product, because our product keeps the essential of this bass. Many times I find that these multiprocessors or digital processors, they put their stamp on the sound. So you can play any bass through it. They all sound the same. So what's the point of owning a $20,000 Fender bass when the $800 brand new Fender bass sound the same, right? So, and Getty actually is very particular about the different years of jazz basses that he owns, because he finds that they have a certain character and sound, and he can really hear that through the Getty 2112. So that's a really high recommendation to our product, that is very transparent.
Absolutely. I saw your interview with Getty in his home studio. I did, and speaking of that interview, he mentioned he used the Getty 2112 in the live performance with Yes at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I wondered if you knew whether he completely removed his speaker sims and the orange heads and all the other gear as a result of that gig, because I know he just took the 2112.
I cannot speak for the future if they're going to use anything else, but I know at that show with Yes, there was no possibility to use anything else, because he was not the only guest. And it's, as you know, Yes is a big band with a lot of musicians, so they want to keep it simple. So he basically had his wireless with his turquoise blue bass going into the Getty 2112, and that was it. So when he showed up to rehearsal, Scully told me that they were really shocked that that's all he has. But then when they plugged it in, they started to play, they were like blown away that, you know, the sound he got, because it was very close and similar to the original Yes sound, which is a Rickenbacker into a Marshall or sometimes SVT, and, you know, overdriven. And obviously it takes up a lot of space on stage and all that. And by the way, this is another little nugget of information. The current bass player in Yes is using our amplifier to get the sound. Trying to think what his name is, because I met him a couple times. You can look it up, but he's a great guy. and we supply him with his he actually uses amps. Okay, he's using our 1000 watt amp, but so that's another little piece of information. But Getty used only the 2112, and it's on YouTube, so anybody can listen to it. It says a tremendous sound. So I don't know what they're going to do in the future, because I know that Getty is going to work with other people, collaboration. He's going to work with Alex also. But yeah, Rush, as we know it, is not going to
No.
tour anymore. But he's going to have other collaborations. So I don't know what else he's going to use, but I know that this is going to always be the core of his sound, because it's reliable, it's in ear, so he can really comfortably sing with that. See, it's very important also that you need to keep your stage volume low when you're a singer,
Absolutely.
so you don't have to strain. And then he plays keyboards and all that stuff. He doesn't have time to deal with all this other thing, So I know that this is going to stay the core of his sound.
I was going to ask, how did the idea of a pedal version come about? Was it created at the same time as the 2112?
No, that's an interesting story. You know what? I'm going to get one because it just looks nice. Here's the thing. When first we talked to Getty about the idea of doing like a product with his name on it, he wanted to do only the rack because that's what he's using. We mentioned, we should do a pedal because everybody nowadays uses pedal. And they were really set against it because Getty has a lot of integrity. He would not endorse anything that he doesn't believe in, and he would not endorse something that he doesn't use. So they said, we don't use pedals. Therefore, there's no pedals. So the way this came about, pedal is coming. So she brought it in, and this is the pedal.
Fabulous looking unit, by the way.
Was that?
Love it. Fabulous looking unit.
Thank you.
Love
And so basically, took us a couple of years to convince them. And the way it went is that I said, I understand you don't use pedals, but a lot of people do. A lot of bass players do. There are a lot of tribute bands, and there are a lot of bands who doesn't maybe play a whole night of Rush songs, but they play one or two. So it would be really prudent and a nice gesture to put your sound into a more convenient format that somebody maybe who has a pedal board could put it on, and then when we play a Rush song, they can kick it in, and then when they're done, they kick it out. Because see, Getty doesn't do that with his rack. His rack is on 100% of the time. That's his sound. He doesn't change his sound. He changes his sound with his fingers. He actually talked about it and showed it, that he can get different sounds where he picks and also change the bass, but the settings are always the same. So they were gracious enough to take our pitch on this and say, you know what, you guys are doing so well with the rack, and we understand that a lot of people are not into racks. They don't use racks. They maybe have a small combo, and then they want to get our sound. So okay, we'll do it. But understand, we don't use a pedal. As long as you guarantee, it's going to sound the same. And of course, I guarantee that because I design all the product. And we sent up the prototypes, and they tried it together with Scully, and they approved it. So there's the stamp of approval. So that's how we came about doing the YYZ, that he finally said, okay, you can do a pedal. So here we are.
Brilliant. And am I right in saying that the drive section from the 2112 is
Absolutely,
the same?
everything is the same. The only thing we don't have on this is the parametric EQ, but I mentioned that he sets up his sound, and that doesn't change it. So we got his setting, and we set up the parameter. We looked at the parametric EQ, and we set up the mid-range here to the same exact frequency. So you don't need to sweep. I understand that if you want to get different sounds, you want to stray from the Geddy Lee sound, then it's a very nice tool. But also don't forget, and this comes to actually what this interview is about, that things are missing from this pedal. There is a reason for that. If you look at, for example, Mercedes-Benz, they have different classes of vehicles. Starts with the A, then the C, then there has the E and the S class. Okay, there's a reason for that because the S class has everything in it, and the A class has the most minimalistic possible way of that you can get from A to B. So
Yeah.
this is not an S class. This is, I would say, a C class. It's still going to give you the Mercedes-Benz, or in this case, the Sans Am, but not every little option. Okay, if you want that, you go with the rack, and that's usually for touring musicians, and they want the rack anyway.
That's right.
Because that's very stable. You put it in there. A lot of people we know they actually have like big power amps. They go run into that directly, and they still use traditional speaker cabinets. But that one has all the bells and whistles, all the XLRs and switching, you know, of A and B and all that. This one gives you the core of the sound, but that one is tuned exactly what the big boy can do. So when you put one next to the other and set up Getty sound, there's going to be no compromise, no shortcuts.
Were there any new innovations that were implemented
Actually,
into the
yes.
pedal?
One of the things that Getty picks his bass, it's almost like a pick with his fingernails. He has really hard fingernails and digs in.
Like
Yeah,
flamenco.
and once I asked him, "Can you play soft?" And he told me I don't do soft, okay? Because I just wanted to show the listeners the sound difference. Because we have sometimes people call in and they own the Getty product. They say, "I don't sound like Getty. It sounds farty." So we tell them, look, it's because Getty picks really hard with his fingers, so you get this attack that some bass players are soft players. So when you play soft, it's going to sound farty through that equipment. So what we introduced on this product is called the tight switch. What it does, it makes the people who play softer, it still make it tighter. It doesn't let the lower strings get apart. And we sent this up to Getty to try, and he actually liked it. You know, so we introduced this to other players, but Getty liked it because what he did, and Scully told me this, is that usually they don't like this kind of a low cut because then you lose bottom end. But since we have the mix control with the deep channel, and the deep channel, not a flat channel that has that pre EQ curve that Getty likes, you can blend the two together that you don't lose any bottom end when you use the tight switch. So they were really impressed with that sound. They said that we can see some possibilities that we can use this new sound on some new things that we are doing. So it is a new feature on this pedal that is available only on the pedal right now.
And I've heard in one of your interviews in the past that the products you create, they're not market driven, that you create the products that you'd like to play. So what was it you saw in the YYZ that you didn't see anywhere else?
Originally, it was really a bass product. We started out with the bass driver DI, which is a DI format. I have a bunch of pedals here. I have so many that I don't always find the right one. So right now I'm going to show you another DI that we make. It's same format. This is the Q strip. That's a parametric EQ, but it's the same format as the bass driver. It has XLR on it and so on and so forth. We've been making that product for 25 years, and it was like a staple. A lot of bass players, they throw it into their gig bag, and then they have a cool sound that they can go direct. They don't have to rely on the club giving them a very flat, boring sounding DI. So what happened is that since we've been making that for years and years, there was a need for touring musicians to create a rack format of that. And that's how we came about with the RBI, which is rack bass driver DI. And that's how we came up with the first racks. And it was really not market driven, but we listened to people. See, I read every warranty card that comes in. Now it comes in online because eventually you start to see a trend. Okay, we don't jump on it like one guy say like put an XLR on the top here. Okay, because he could say that, and he's the only guy ever said that, then we know it's not a good idea. But then when it's 20, 30 people or 100 people keep saying the same thing, and it's like maybe something to it. So it's not like being market driven, but paying attention what working musicians say. And that's how I would say that we're trying to stay flexible enough, but I also try to combine it with my own ideas and my own desires, what I want to see in the product.
And was there any part of the pedal design that came out better than you expected?
Better. I don't know. I'm a perfectionist, so for me, nothing is better than what I wanted, but I don't stop until at least on the level that I had in my head. And we do so many little tiny details that people overlook. Like, for example, this actuator. This looks like a mechanical foot switch, but it's not. It has a spring at the end, which is 100-gram pressure that it pushes a Omron switch. Omron is the best switch in the world. Most switches are guaranteed to 10 to 20,000 actuation. This one is guaranteed over 1 million actuation. And all you have, if you're, let's say you're a 300-pound guy, you step on this foot switch, you put the 300-pound on the foot switch, you're still putting 100-gram pressure on the actual actuator. So you can't wear it out. And that's the biggest problem with mechanical switches, and people think that true bypass is the best thing. It's not, because those switches break all the time because they're mechanical. So what we do, we call it the buffer bypass. So we have FETs that switch, and we buffer them. So it's, first of all, it's silent. Second of all, it's like you can switch so many times and you're not going to have any misses, or a breakage or clicking noise, So that's one of the small details. And so many other things, like how we protect the circuitry. The jacks we use are much more expensive than most other people that use. The power supply, the power supply jack, the box itself, even like the little thing like a battery clip. You know how many battery clips are like that kind of soft, like wiggly? This one is like really heavy duty, hard. You can bend it. So very hard and solid. So I pay attention to the smallest detail because I was a working musician myself, and I hated it when things broke, and they broke constantly, always at the worst possible time. So that's another reason that we listen to what musicians say, because then we can get more input, like what went wrong or what they want to see. So it's not market driven, but we do listen.
I've been looking at some of the features of the YYZ, and as you've already touched on, I couldn't help but notice there's no XLR or parallel outputs. A DI doesn't necessarily have to be built into a unit. Is there any sort of mitigating way that you can still take an output of the unit in the same effect as a DI?
Well, yes. The idea was that this product is actually, it can go direct, but we didn't design this as a DI product. The reason being, because nowadays, bass players have actually more than one pedal. They have a pedal, many times 5, 6, sometimes 10, 12 pedals. So this is actually not at the end of the chain. So if it's not at the end, let's say you have a chorus pedal, or you have a compressor, whatever, then the XLR is useless, because now you have the chorus, and then you have blah, and then you need the XLR. So you wasted the XLR for no reason, beside the fact that it would increase the cost of the pedal. As I said, this is also not the S class, this is the C class of a pedal, which is, by the way, is not the performance is C class. The performance is A class. Is the features and add-ons that we don't have, the extras. Right. Now, here's another interesting fact. People don't realize this, that all of our pedals output is low Z, low impedance. So you could actually run 100 feet of cable from here to a mixing board, you would have no signal loss. In the old days, it wasn't like that. So it's not necessary to have an XLR to run 100 feet of cable, okay? So you can run this directly to a board. Or if you're recording, you can run into a low impedance channel, you're going to have no problem. It's not balanced. But actually, balanced was introduced and developed for microphones. Microphones have 1 to 5 millivolt of signal, which is a very low signal. Mind you, like a bass has around 100 millivolt output, so 100 times more. So when you go to 100 times less and you run long distance, you need that XLR because they actually cancel hum because it's like a humbucking setup. So they put the signal out of phase and they put it back in phase at the other end. So if the individual pairs pick up some hum on the way, then it's going to come back out of phase, the hum, so now they cancel. But it's not necessary when you have 100 millivolt of signal. It's much more powerful signal, so you don't have to deal with those minute noises because the signal to noise ratio is different. So that's one of the things. So XLRs are kind of overrated at this point because with modern equipment or with even like active bases, that's not an issue. You can run very long cables without any signal degradation. The other thing is that on this pedal is not that much space. We know a company who does modifications to these pedals. They put an XLR in. What they do, they put the XLR right here, but you can't use a battery any longer. So you have to give up something. Exactly.
Choose, yeah.
And I have to remind you that engineering is about compromise. Anything you design or engineer, like let's say a bridge, is going to be compromised between different features: cost, reliability, how heavy duty you want to make it, because you can make that bridge like 100 times heavier duty, but it's going to cost you more. It's going to be taking longer to build, many other problems. So you try to optimize between features and what you get at the end. So we felt that this is a pedal and this is the best combination of the features and cost, but the sound was ultimately the most important to keep that intact and the same.
That's a very, I guess, ingenious feature. I didn't realize the low Z was on it. I've heard about it in the manual. I presume a lot of your pedals have the low Z. Do any other
all of them
competitors
have that, yes. And as a matter of fact, here's the other fact. You can buy a very workable DI for about $20 to $30. Nowadays, a lot of things, I don't want to mention names, but there are companies who make copies of expensive products and they make it really cheap and they're reasonably good.
Yeah.
So if this is what you want the pedal out and the DI, you shell out another $20 or $30 or pounds, and you have it. And you have it at the end of your signal chain. See, here's the other problem. We built some pedals with XLR output, and then people say that I need an effect loop now because my other pedals has to be before the XLR. I look at this pedal.
Yeah.
I hardly could squeeze in the XLR. I put in a effects loop, I'm done. So there's an endless request. You comply with one thing, and then there's the next request. And the same thing with the parametric EQ. Why can't you put the parametric on it? Look at it. Oh, room. You know? How many more things you want, you know? I mean, it's legit. And as I said, it's available, but you have to step up to the bigger product. So this is a small product. It fits in your gig bag, you know. It is what it is. And I understand that there are people who want more, but you're always going to have that. And you have to be reasonable, you know. How much you get. Was that?
It's a signature pedal, so it's built to Geddy's specs, and this is what he wanted out of it.
Approve this. He said it's okay, go with it. So we also have other signature pedals, for example, with Richie Kotzen, our guitar pedal, and people say the same thing. Why don't you have this? Why don't you have that? And we say, wait a minute, Richie wanted this, and we built it for him exactly the way he wanted it. So what you're saying is legit, but it's not what Richie asked. So if Geddy's happy with this, then we are happy. And I understand, and we always open to suggestions. And if, you know, who knows in the future what else could be, you know, available and what else we're going to design. But right now, I'm personally happy with the pedal. It does what I want it to do. And I understand there are other things that it could do, and maybe one day it will do.
So there's some ideas for some special editions there.
Never know.
Maybe.
Never know. We've known to have deluxe version of some of our products, and other companies do that too. So, if a product really have a life of its own, then you start to branch out and have variations of that product.
Thank you, Andrew. To finish up, I just have a few quick fire questions for you, if you
Sure.
don't mind. Is there any musician whose tone you look at and think, man, I just want to make a pedal for
Yes, actually. One was actually Doc Pinnick, and we did that. Actually,
Fantastic.
that one is right in front of me. So we did
them?
that.
There it is.
Because he has a very unique tone. And for those of you bass players who is not familiar with Doc Pinnick, put in King's X and listen to a couple of their songs. It's amazing. And they actually developed that grunge detuned sound before even that existed. And a lot of these bands are looking up, like Pearl Jam. They look up to Doc Pinnick, and we sold Doc Pinnick's amp head to Pearl Jam, because they just love the sound. But one guy that I wish I could have met and worked with, and not with us anymore, is of course, now excuse me, yes, help me here, the bass player, yes,
Lemmy?
not Lemmy, yes, for yes.
Oh, I can't remember his name, but I know who you mean.
It's gonna come to me.
Was it Chris Squire?
Chris Squire, yeah.
Who got there in the end?
Chris Squire. So Chris Squire is one of the guys that I wish I could work with and get his sound into a little pedal like this. So when he runs around, and jams or something, he can carry it in his pocket. And who else? As I said, Entwistle, I was fortunate enough to work with him and get a great sound and so I'm very proud of that. Another one is the bass player from Cheap Trick, because he also runs like a two-way system, very similar to this, with like a 12-string bass, which is really cool. 3 strings per, which Doug also does.
Wow.
And we worked with the bass player for Pearl Jam and countless others. I'm trying to think. This whole revolution of distorted bass. It started to happen like in the 80s. Yeah, and now it's like everybody has that. But Tool, that was an early one. Pantera, I worked with them. Who else? So many. We have a list on our website, which, by the way, is tech21nyc.com. You have to put the NYC in because there's a company who makes phone cases.
I kept getting them in my Google results. It was
It's
really confusing, yeah.
Right. But you have to put in the NYC, and then we have an artist page that we have 200-300 artists that really top players. Of course, many of them are guitar players, but a lot of bass players there who uses our products and revolutionary bass players. I call John Entwistle a revolutionary bass player because I think he's one of the first one who had the overdriven bass. Like in my generation, the bass solo there, that blows your mind. That was so intense, right? But Chris Squire is one of my heroes that I missed of meeting with, and I love his bass sound and I love the Rick. This is a 73 back. The Rick has that sound, So I particularly wanted to own this bass because of Chris.
It's a good-looking bass. I love the color on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any favorite pedals? It could be one of your own, or it could be, dare I say, a competitor.
Well, here's the thing. One of my close and very good friend who started me actually on my own company is Mike Matthews from Electro Harmonix. I immigrated from Hungary in 1980. I came to this country, and that's about the time when he went out of business with Electro Harmonix. So I missed him. And later on, when I was doing my repair shop, he was selling tubes, Softac tubes. So I met him, and I convinced him to restart Electro Harmonix, which he did. And one of my favorite pedals was Big Muff, because that's like an iconic pedal. For bass or for guitar, you can use it on anything. So I would say the Big Muff is one of my I was like 14 years old when I got my first Big Muff, and I was a huge fan of Electro-Harmonix because he made pedals affordable, built in the USA with a great sound, and they always had a personality. See, my problem is with a lot of pedals that they are copy of a copy of a copy. But Mike's pedals were always, that was an Electro-Harmonix product. You just knew it. And even till this day, they come out with pedals that nobody else made. Like they have that Hammond organ simulator that you play a guitar through, and on the other end, there's a Hammond comes out. It's amazing. Nobody did anything like that. So I have so much respect for people like that. And I always try to fashion my company like that, that I don't want to keep copying other people's product. I want to offer something that is new and useful for a working musician.
What advice would you give to someone trying to create their own pedal or getting into modding?
Well, what I did basically, I was playing music and I always tinkered with pedals and figured out like if I change this cap, what would that do? You know, how does it change the sound? And read a lot of information. Back then it was books, like Craig Anderson's book was essential for me about how to build music electronics. Now it's all on the internet. So you can do a lot of research on the internet. And basically just doing it. It's just like playing the instrument. You could go to all the schools. You're never going to become a famous musician. It's a good thing. Learning is a good thing, but you have to develop your own angle, your own sound. And the only way you can do that is to put a lot of sweat and tears into it.
Trial and error.
Trial and error. Same on the instrument. Keep playing things and don't listen to anybody. Try to do what you believe. Like what, as I said, people said like, "Oh, I don't want distortion on bass." I didn't listen to them because I love distortion on bass.
me too.
As I said, like the Who, you know, like that sound. So I just kept at it. And then if you believe in that, you're going to be successful.
And speaking of electronics, I hear you're a very strong advocate for analog technology. What is it that analog brings to you that digital just doesn't have?
Well, digital is keep improving. There's no denial of every year it gets better, cheaper, and can do more. And one of the huge convenience of digital is that you can change configuration so quickly and you can get so many things. But analog, if you look at, for example, a waveform, analog is infinite, meaning of that there is no small part of that waveform that you see a step. Digital always going to have a little step somewhere. So the resolution is keep improving. Now we have 24-bit and it's keep improving and a signal to noise. But there's always a point where there is like, okay, it's digital. So it's harder to recognize between digital and analog. But here's a good way to do this. This is a very interesting story. We developed a pedal with Paul Landers from Rammstein for guitar. And then he was using a digital modeler before that. And they had it in the rack and they were doing huge shows and everything. And when you play that modeler and you listen to it, you cannot tell the difference. It's perfect. But then when the whole band was playing and they were switching between that and the product we were developing, they heard the difference.
Really?
It's very interesting because something about when you're in a context of a band, like there is cymbals and drums and bass and singing going on, then all of a sudden little minor differences show up much more. See, the human ear has a feature that is like almost like a compression. If you ever notice that if you listen to a loud band, your ear kind of compresses it.
Yes.
And also if you listen to something really bright, then your ear becomes dull.
Yes.
Okay, because you compensate, your brain compensates. So when you listen to like a digitally processed signal on its own, then it's fine. But then when it becomes in the context of a band, then you're going to start to hear the differences. So lately, that's what I do. I try to, when I develop products, I don't develop them on their own. I put it in the context of like a whole band. You know, and that's actually also the best way to EQ an instrument.
EQ in the group.
In a group, that's
Yeah.
right. See, people make that mistake that they plug in their guitar or bass into mixer and they mix out a good sound. And this is my sound. Sounds great. And then the band shows up and they get lost in the mix because guess what they did? They scooped it out.
Yeah.
Too much. Because they want a lot of low end, a lot of high end, crunchy. Oh, it sounds great. Not in the context of a band. So that's my advice, is to really listen to everything in the context of a band. And for me, analog is still king. And I know it's a losing battle because digital is getting better and better, but analog never going to be inferior in sound. No. Maybe in features that you cannot change, an algorithm and switch, so quickly. But for ultimate sound, I think analog always going to, because our ear is analog.
Yes,
this is an analog little drum in there. Yeah. So we like to listen to analog things. We like to go out in the forest and listen to the noise of the leaves and the birds are singing. That's all analog stuff. You can't deny that. That's millions of years of evolution. So we're drawn to those sounds. That's why when you hear like a digital distortion without any filtering, it's really alien. Harsh, exactly. Because in nature, it doesn't exist.
No.
Yeah. So analog is always going to be king.
I guess it's just convenience for the most common consumer, isn't it? But there's always going to be the purists who love analog, and as you're an advocate for it, it's just one of those things that you just can't go back from.
Yeah, no, and you shouldn't. Listen, isn't that beautiful that you can hold a piece of string in your hand and it vibrates, right? I can make this sound digital too.
Yeah.
I can compare the two. And look at like a great piano player, artist. They're going to request a Steinway at their concert. They're not going to want to play a digital piano. But somebody who is an amateur and listen to the recording, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But you can tell the difference how it feels. It feels good. It feels good to play and you hear the sound and you bend it and push it. You don't get that with the digital replication of that. So this is analog. I don't think this ever going to be anything better than this, that a string that is moving. That's what your vocal cords do. That's what everything in nature does. That the drums, they vibrate and resonate. That's the best thing in the world.
Of course.
So why would you lose that?
No, I totally agree. And lastly, Andrew, what's next for Tech 21? Are there any more artist series coming forward?
Talking about new stuff, yes, a lot of things are. Actually, it's right behind the camera. I'll show you. But I'm working on several things, but I have to keep it under wraps because it's just like the iPhone. They don't tell you all the features until they're actually available. Otherwise, all the competition, they start to copy it. So you
right
have
away.
Hold it to the last minute. But yes, there are a lot of exciting things are coming.
Awesome. Can't wait. Andrew Barta, thank you very much for joining us today on the interview. And it's been really fun to talk to you and learn more about Geddy Lee and how he used the SansAmp YYZs and Geddy 2112. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and be in touch. And if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate either yourself to email us or directly. You can email at info@tech21nyc.com any questions you have.
Thank you. And I'll put that in the show notes. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much for your time. It's been nice to meet you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
A big thank you to Andrew for joining me today, and you can find out more about the release of the YYZ at tech21nyc.com.